My wife had taken the kids to visit her sister, who'd recently had a baby, so I was left alone for the weekend, free to do whatever I wanted. I decided to grill some burgers, an activity with which my wife has on many occasions expressed issue, largely due to the fact that I prefer fattier cuts of meat, and while I don't presently have any health issues, she's certain that I'm sure to develop them if I enjoy a less than lean burger more than once a year. I set off for the store almost as soon as I was sure that she had not simply driven in a circle around the block. Excitedly jumping in my truck and quickly reaching the residential speed limit. It was around midday, the sun's bountiful light elevating my already bright mood, and I cruised into the grocery store's parking lot with a broad smile on my face. With the same boyish glee as I'd entered the vehicle, I leapt out and strode toward the store, smiling kindly to the ancient, understandably bitter-faced greeter as I passed her. Inside, I wasted no time in heading to the meat section, even ignoring my habitual detour toward the electronic department, wherein I'd usually peruse the $5 Blu-ray bin for 1980s to early 2000s sci-fi and action classics, which are often on sale. I greeted the butcher, who was a little shaken by my unashamedly expressed enthusiasm, but he brightened at once when I explained the cause for my excitement, and subsequently congratulated me on the temporary freedom and sovereignty of home. I asked for 2 pounds of ground beef, 75% lean, and a few appropriate herbs and spices, which were readily available on a nearby counter. He dutifully complied, and I would have then hurried towards self-checkout and been on my way. But just as I was turning toward the registers, I saw a peculiar-looking portion of meat in the rearmost section of the display. There was no label, but the meat looked, compared to its neighbors, extremely red, almost cartoonishly crimson, and its price was similarly unusual, $6.66 per pound. I had selected enough meat to satisfy my hunger for the weekend, but figured that, given the rarity of the occasion, it wouldn't hurt to stock up on enough for Monday's lunch. When I inquired about the meat, the butcher's face fell, losing its sympathetic happiness and becoming grim, almost foreboding in expression. He said that, while the meat was for sale, he advised against purchasing it, and when the curiosity in my face bid him to continue, he went on to say that it had come from an unscheduled shipment from a remote supplier. These descriptions only served to heighten my interest. I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate the solitary weekend than with potentially exotic meat. I implored him to package a portion of the meat for me, and being a duty-bound employee, he complied, wrapping it in a special kind of paper I hadn't ever seen him use before. It was brown and thick, like time-hardened parchment, and covered in many strange, unfamiliar symbols, blackly and haphazardly scribed across the material. But I accepted the packaging without protest, feeling that it added further novelty to the curious meat. I thanked him, earnestly and excitedly, and even offered him a tip for his services, but he gently pushed away the $10 bill I'd placed on the glass counter, saying that he couldn't in good conscience accept payment for simply doing his job. I got the impression that there was more to his refusal than just professional humility, but honored his wishes. Anyway, I then paid for my meat and returned home. Once the meat had been seasoned, the grill started, and the coals heated, I delicately laid my handmade patties on the grate, giving the curiously red burgers a good amount of room away from the others, so as to ensure that their natural flavor remained unaffected by the others, and vice versa. Closing the lid, I sat on one of my patio chairs, beer in hand, and lounged, basking in the afternoon sunlight, listening to the soft simmer of the meat. Later, when I had finished grilling and was piling the burgers onto a platter to take inside, a sudden gloom entered the sky, and while this alone wasn't exactly startling, given how temperamental Midwestern weather can be. What was a little unnerving was that the gloom seemed only present above my land. Looking beyond the limits of my property, I saw nothing but radiant sunlight and clear skies elsewhere. No mounting darkness blotted out the sun's brilliance on the properties of the Fosters, nor the Matherleys. Even the lawn of that perpetually mean-tempered Mr. Hillebrand shone pleasantly from afar. Something, a once dormant but now awakening instinct, told me to go inside, to lock the back door and fill my house with light, artificial or otherwise, in an even deeper sense. A dimmer impulse told me to grip the blood-red patties, which I had cooked to what I felt was medium rare, and to hurl them into the encroaching gray clouds. But I ignored both impulses, refusing to heed the former, and barely even acknowledging the latter. Awed by the suddenness of the gloom's appearance, I placed the platter on the patio table and went to the patio's edge, stopping there unconsciously, as a pedestrian might halt on the curb of the road, even in the absence of cars. My yard, which I had mowed the day before, for some reason seemed vaguely unwelcoming, as if some uncatalogued and venomous pest lurked amidst the newly hewn blades of grass. Just when this feeling of inexpressible strangeness threatened to drive me away from the patio altogether, a lightning bolt suddenly shot down from the overhanging cloud form, striking the yard with incredible electric violence. The ground shook, and I nearly fell forward onto the grass, saved from falling faceward by my hand, which had gripped the leg of the grill at the very last second. My body, compelled to autonomous action by the aforementioned instinct, had seen fit to keep me from coming into contact with the indescribably altered lawn. After steadying myself, I looked toward the lawn, expecting to see a large section of it ablaze, or at least a few embers at the spot where the lightning had struck. But there were no scorch marks, not even so much as a disturbed blade of grass. There was only a small impression of weight on a particular spot, almost as if an invisible object had been conveyed landward by the bolt of supercharged particles. This, even more than the strange and undefinable atmosphere about the lawn, sounded those primally embedded alarms in my brain, as if to confirm my prehistorically inherited fears. The invisible object appeared to move, the grass beneath crumpling pace by pace, as if being slowly tread upon by invisible feet. As the unseen thing neared, bits of debris and nature slowly rose from the ground, as if drawn to the figure by some phantasmal magnetism. I watched, spellbound by the unreality of it, as small pebbles, blades of grass, and clumps of dirt found themselves stuck against and even lodged within an invisible, slowly moving surface. The grill, which I had closed, its vents also shut to snuff out the lingering embers, suddenly opened, and the crumbled charcoal therein rose through the spaces in the grate and flew toward the approaching entity. The near invisible figure, now chaotically aswirl with ash and bits of charcoal, stumbled closer, and with each grass trampling step its form became more distinct. And upon reaching the patio whereon I stood, bewildered and frozen with fear, its form at last became largely solid, the specter almost completely armored in the natural and ashen debris. I say almost, because while the human-like figure was covered enough to be identifiable as such, its head and neck remained uncovered, the space above the shoulders still eerily invisible. This unsettling headlessness broke my spell of fee-induced immobility. I stumbled back, awkwardly yet sufficiently galvanized by terror, while the thing stood there regarding me with its inscrutable face, and while its posture and general aspect weren't visually intimidating, there was an unmistakable evil in its very nature, an impression I received not merely from the bizarreness of its composition, but the otherworldly atmosphere it exuded. The still present darkness that had heralded its arrival complemented this baleful impression. I knew then that retreating into the house would be foolish, even if I could somehow prevent the thing from entering. I knew, with a baseless but nonetheless firm certainty, that it would remain on my property until I banished it, or it did something unimaginable to me. So, gripping my spatula, which I'd left beside the platter of meat, I asked, in wavering tones, what the thing wanted. Unaffected by the brandished utensil, the partially armored entity turned its attention to the table. Its gaze then seemed to hone in on the platter of meat, and for a brief, hopeful second, I imagined that the thing was just hungry, that it had, somehow, smelled the cooking meats from some far-flung dimension, and come to ask for a taste. This hopeful, but admittedly naive thought was quickly ejected from my mind when the thing raised an ash-gloved hand to me and said, you dare burn my flesh. To appease whom? What black-spirited god would demand such a profane act of obeisance? Its voice was harsh, like its scavenged skin, as hollow as its still somewhat visible interior. Dumbfounded, I hadn't for a moment expected the thing to speak. I stood there, my mouth agape, the spatula fanning the air in my trembling hand, when the question was repeated, this time in a gravelly tone that befit its coal-clad figure. I spoke up, fearing that I'd be harmed if I remained quiet. I didn't know. Are you saying that the red meat was your flesh? The thing seemed to bristle with a sudden rage at the suggestion that its flesh was merely meat to me, lowering its hand, which then subtly curled into a rock-knuckled fist. It stepped a foot closer and said, yes, it was taken from me, cruelly and stealthily, while I slept in my tomb. I, and all who are of the species to which I belong, am immune to the ravaging of the grave worm and death. Corruption does not whittle and rot our flesh. Time, no matter how much it aggregates itself, cannot model our skin or powder our bones. It is for this reason that we are often plagued in death's sleep by corpse lovers and the lazier cannibals. I took a moment before responding, having a hard time processing the more than morbid statements and the darker implications of his words. Well, that sucks, but I've already cooked it. So unless you can somehow put that back on your body, I don't see what use it would be to you. The rage I had sensed earlier suddenly flared, and without warning the thing lunged at me, hands outstretched towards my neck, not wanting to be throttled by some undead, dirt-adorned specter. I swung the spatula, slapping my attacker in its invisible face. To my surprise, this not only halted its assault, but staggered it. It stumbled backwards, rubbing its transparent cheek in shock, compelled more so by hunger than an instinct for survival. I had yet to eat. I pressed on, this time striking the thing on the other, unprotected cheek. The blow landed solidly, and the thing fell rightward against the patio table. Its face landed squarely on the platter of patties, its cheek impacting the sanguine burger. In a truly repulsing display of biological familiarity, the patty, of its own uncanny volition, attached itself to the thing's invisible cheek. But due to having been cooked, the meat did not remain adhered there long, falling from the face when the thing shifted its head in its disorientation, elated that the gruesome assimilation hadn't worked. I was not interested in seeing even an approximation of the thing's true appearance. I sprang to action once more, gripping the thing by the shoulders. I pulled it away from the table and, turning, pushed it into the open grill. It collided roughly, and parts of its salvaged carapace fell away from its figure, revealing once more the invisible flesh beneath. Driven by some primeval impetus for human dominance over all things unhuman, I wrapped my arms around its waist and hoisted it onto the grate of the grill, then slammed the lid shut. I heard the form within promptly collapse, and a few bits of debris fell through the bottom vents. Not finished, filled with a spirit of caveman-like barbarity, I grabbed the bottle of lighter fluid from the shelf beneath the grill, opened the topmost vent, and squirted a healthy supply inside. I heard the thing cough and sputter, and forced myself not to think about just how exactly it had accomplished such a physical reaction, being so thoroughly disembodied. Now grabbing my grill matches, I struck a match tip alight, and gripped the handle of the lid, ready to toss the match in, and shut the lid as soon as the damply doused entity caught flame. Understanding what I intended to do, the thing roared out its rage, and in a voice that was altogether infernal and alien, promised to inflict upon me the most awful and unspeakable tortures. It swore to rend and tear my flesh, whilst keeping me alive with some death-defying sorcery, so that I could watch, fleshless and broken, as it and others of its kind ate of my body. Briefly, I considered freeing the thing and apologizing. The sheer ghastliness of those fates, however unlikely, reigniting a little of my earlier terror, but my innate sense of human stubbornness and indignity won out, and I opened the lid, match poised like a sparking flare. I don't want to describe what I saw inside. I will only say that any hesitation I might have had was summarily dismissed when I saw that unceremoniously imploded pile of debris lying there on the grate. In that moment of heightened disgust and newfound horror, you couldn't have stopped me from tossing the match in and setting ablaze that deathless, wretched nightmare. I slammed the lid shut and shrunk away from the grill, and the thing's flame-tortured voice rose to an infernal, ear-splitting pitch as the fire worked its magic. Great plumes of black smoke pushed through the open vents, further darkening the atmosphere, giving the whole scene the appearance of some Hadean pyre. And like the furnaces of hell, the grill fumed tempestuously, giving off a singing heat and rocking on its legs. Eventually, the trapped thing's voice died out, and I knew that the flames had at last fatally consumed it, that not even its self-acclaimed imperviousness to rot and decay had saved it from the pyrochemical violence of fire. Smiling, I stood by and let the thing burn a few moments longer, just to be sure, and then, when I could barely see through the Stygian haze, closed the vents, suffocating the raging flames. Almost immediately, the preternatural overcast cleared, and the sun again cast its pleasant rays onto my yard. Satisfied, I went inside, grabbed a bun and another beer, and returned to the patio. While the grill cooled, I sat at the table, put a patty on the buns, and munched away, noting with approval the delectable gaminess of the patty I'd selected.